as Lidev, and I'm here to go into the second part of spoilers that's been revealed from Ravnica's Allegiances, a set that's upcoming at the end of January. And we got actually some interesting new cards, even one that got revealed today as I'm recording this on Saturday, which I wasn't suspecting that, so it's kind of nice to see that surprise. Anyway, let's get on to the cards that got revealed. I think it's over 20 we got, like around 29 or something I have to cover, so let's get started with a really weird card, Drill Bit. 2 and a black, sorcery, which has a spectacle cost of 1 black, which, you know, with spectacle, if you're able to deal damage to an opponent, you can pay the spectacle cost rather than the normal mana cost. And target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Never boring. As I kind of made the pun of with this card, this is kind of like a Pain Seas, aka a Thoughtseize and such, if we do pay for the 1 black mana. Now, being able to hate a specific card out of your opponent's hand is nice. For free mana, though, sorcery, it's a little costly. Like, I don't think you'll mind doing this late game and such, but really, let's be frank, you kind of want to try to do this as early as you can, as you kind of like to do with most hand hate cards and such. And the catch-22 with this card is, as far as I'm aware, in Standard, there's no way you can cast this for its spectacle cost on turn 1. There's no way to generate 2 mana onto 1 and be able to deal the damage to generate the black mana. That's not possible. Still, this is actually an interesting turn 2 play. Let's say you play an aggressive 1-drop, and then you're able to deal a point of damage on turn 2, and then you could play like maybe 2 drill bits, or just 1 drill bit and another aggressive creature. That's actually a very tempting thought. It makes kind of like cards like the Goblin, always the 1-drop Goblin that you always see in aggro decks. Forgetting the name of it. It's the one that has haste, and then you can sacrifice to deal 1 point of damage. Or even the card that, for some reason, thanks to one of my friends actually talked about, Vicious Conquistador. They're kind of like aggressive 1-drops that you can guarantee to get a point of damage in, which could actually help make this card a lot more effective in Standard. Whether or not it will see Standard play is debatable. I don't think it will see play like in a blue-black hand-hate deck because we have Fodder Erasure, and Fodder Erasure is just a really better card over this one for, well, obvious reasons. I mean, the fact that you can Surveil one and hate the handout, and it's 1 less mana than this. Granted, this could be cheaper if you can activate the Spectacle costs. Still, I think it's going to be a card that will be tested out at the very least, because Hand Hate is very powerful, even in specific metas that have, like, specific cards that you try to hate out of people's hands, so you don't want to play against them, like maybe Niv Mizzet and such in the Standard, or even Teferi. So, I think it will be tried out in a mid-range or aggro deck. I mean, paying Spectacle on turn 2 free is actually a lot easy in the right deck archetype, so it's not a bad card. Though, also, even for free mana, well, yeah, playing free mana for this is, I see it in late game when you have enough mana to sink in that you already played out your hand, you might not feel bad playing this free mana. Overall, I think this card is good. Whether or not it will see Standard play is going to vary, in my personal opinion. I can see the potential. I mean, Hand Hate is a very powerful mechanic, but really, it's kind of a wait and see if a mid-range or aggro deck kind of wants this type of card. Next up, we're going to talk about a blue enchantment called Verity Circle. 2 and a blue for an enchantment whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped. If it isn't being declared as an attacker, you may draw a card. And then 4 and a blue, tap target creature without flying. Here, there is only truth. Now, with this card specifically, it's actually a lot more effective in Standard than you think of at first glance. Now, the obvious play that this might see play in is in Commander, since a lot of people have activated ability creatures and creature ways that they tap creatures for alternative purposes and such. So, in Commander, this is probably going to be tested in control decks, because the factor that people will be tapping their creatures down a lot for specific reasons, or maybe you have opportunities to tap opponents' creatures down. I mean, heck, in Commander, if you have like one big sleep effect against like maybe a big board state that your opponents are having, that could get you a lot of card draws pretty quick. However, what surprised me more the more I think about it, this might actually see a little fringe standard play, just for the factor alone that there are actually a lot of decks that do tap their creatures that are not attacking with them. The ones I can think of right off the bat is like in green decks with Llanowar Elves, they always tap for mana and their mana dorks and such. That's a way you can draw a card from this. And even with like token decks that use the convoke mechanic for like March of the Multitudes or Loxodon and such, you could actually get a decent amount of card draw from this card just by those factors alone. Now, the question is for standard whether or not you're going to spend free mana on a do nothing enchantment that you're hopefully going to draw cards, hoping that the opponent will tap them. That is debatable. One could make the argument that maybe this card is an incentive to make the opponent less likely of wanting to activate on their game plan that requires tapping creatures down for specific things like Convoke and such because they're scared about the card draw. On the other side of the coin, I think they're just going to do that, give you the card draw, and just be fine with it. It's going to be in a specific deck, I would say, if it sees play in Standard. The one combo I can think of right off in Standard is, as I mentioned with Commander, with Sleep. The fact that Sleep now becomes a card draw engine thanks to this enchantment is actually kind of cool. So, I think this is a card that might be toyed with in Standard in some control archetypes, but I could also see it easily being cut out and more like a very good Commander card. We'll just have to wait and see. Next up, a common of the set, Homunculus. So, a 4 and a blue for a 2/5 hexproof Homunculus. Honestly, this card is more just kind of a pack filler for draft or sealed, but honestly, this card is actually amazing for a few things. One, the art is hilarious. The factor it's a giant homunculus, and the factor that it continues the chronicles of Flip, which is a homunculus that were in the original Ravnica sets and such. It's just a really cute flavor card. It's hilarious. I mean, that flavor text, searching the city for Flip, felt like sifting a rain for a single drop of blood. So just imagine the mental image of this giant homunculus trying to look for a little homunculus. It's just on the flavor. And as for standard play, I mean, there have been incentive to trying to make the defenders attack with toughness decks be a thing, like with Arcades and even a card we're going to see soon. This might potentially be a top end for that deck since, well, it's hexproof, so it can't be targeted easily, and attacking for 5 with hexproof is, well, we like to attach with Carnage Tyrant for 7, so who knows. Now, in Popper, probably too slow, but we'll see. Next up, Angelic Exaltation. I get that. You're exalting. I get you. I get you. 3 and a white for an enchantment, uncommon. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until in a turn, well, X is the number of creatures you control. If we cannot have peace, we will have justice. From Aurelia, which as we know is a legendary mythic that came from the original Guilds of Ravnica, so that was nice. As for the card itself, I think has potential to see standard play. It definitely has potential to see commander play because it's a enchantment that in token decks might actually be really good. Getting like a wide board, having a commander out, and then being able to attack for a high amount of damage with your commander, that is actually very powerful. There are technically potentially better enchantments that does the same effect, or even better artifacts that does this similar effect to an extent. But as an enchantment, it's actually pretty nice. Also, just in standard, if we do get the token decks that we've been seeing, like Selesnya tokens and such, there might be a chance that they might try this enchantment over stuff like Divine Visitation if they're like going against an aggro matchup, just for the fact that they could get a quick win in, like maybe if they have a flyer and then they have a bunch of tokens and then just get into for the flyer for a high amount of damage. That's a possibility. But the problem is, like with all enchantments, cool effect, but it is on 4 mana, doing nothing technically speaking. Though you could make the argument for this one, technically you could say it's like a 4 mana pump et spell when you're in a board state that you know you can finish off the game. So this one is, I say, has the potential to be a lot more playable than, say, Verity Circle. But still, be very cautious of this card. It might see standard play, though I am kinda on the fence on it. Because, well, do nothing enchantments, unless they can close out the game and you can get to a board state where you can close out the game by turn 4 or later, we just have to wait and see. Next up, we get for a few commons that got revealed in the set, which is the first one, Burning Tree Vandal. 2 and a red for a human rogue 2-1 that has Riot, so it can either be a 2-1 with haste, or a free 2, pretty much a 2-1 with a counter when it enters the battlefield. Whenever Burning Tree Vandal attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. The ostentatious splendor of the Orzhov Church was just asking to be smashed. Now, whenever Burning Tree Vandal attacks, the fact that you can discard a card and draw a card, so I believe it's called looting if I remember correctly. The factor that you can loot with this card is actually kind of a nice limited card in general. I mean, we do paying free mana for a Piker with haste is alright, especially the factor that it can pretty much loot consistently. That's actually pretty good as a limited card in my personal opinion. And the worst case scenario, if the board state is dictating it, you could just have this enter in as a free 2 that anytime it attacks, you discard a card and draw a card. That's actually just a really decent ability. This is a card that I think is a really good limited card in the right, like, aggro to mid-range decks. Will this see constructed play? I mean, the looting ability is nice, don't get me wrong. But the stats, with how competitive the stats are in the current meta, I don't know. I highly doubt it, but, well, who knows? Maybe in a, pretty much maybe it's a creature in an aggro deck in standard and helps with the loot ability. Maybe. I highly doubt it though. I think there are better ways and even better options for your aggro decks in the current standard meta. But still, I think this is a nice limited card. Might also see some popper play because any opportunity for a draw engine is something to consider. Maybe. Next up, gorgeous Seth McKinnon art, yet again. Grasping Froll, free white and a black for a flying Froll 3-3. When the Grasping Froll enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. You gain 2 life. Deptu, Deptu, the Froll screeching makes children flinch and debtors quail. Det-do. Now, this is obviously very ominous what this Froll is obviously doing. In the, pretty much the Ravnica lore and such, they're pretty much deck collectors, so, or pretty much forthcoming such of that. I actually need to get the art book for this because I think some of the art is actually looking really gorgeous. As for the card itself, it's a fine limited card. It's a 5-mana free flyer that has a little peen to it. We play stuff like Sky Marcher's Aspirant in the past, and while this is a little bit of a higher cost Sky Marcher Aspirant, I think it's fine if you're in the right colors. I don't think this is like a pack one, pick one per se. Yeah, this is definitely not a pack one, pick one, but if you're in these colors, you probably don't mind it as a flyer because it is evasive and the life gain is not bad. As for constructed, I don't think so. I mean, there are decks that do have the life gain matter synergies type styles, but I think there are better options within the meta than this to be able to gain life and do card draw like with the Radiant Hope decks and such. So, still, I think this is more like a really fine limited card with some really gorgeous art. Next up, a card that actually might see standard play, Titanic Brawl. 1 in a green for an instant. Just keep in mind when I say instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast if it targets creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So this is a instant Prey Upon, essentially. Now, Prey Upon doesn't really see much play in standard because of the factor alone, it's just, well, sorcery speed. However, the factor that this is instant speed kind of totally changes the equation. And we do have kind of like +1/+1 counter deck matters, especially with Merfolk and such. So I feel like Merfolk decks might actually consider this card as a good removal spell. They have a Merfolk with counters on it. They see a creature that's problematic. They use Titanic Brawl. They fight the creature, remove it, there you go. There's also decks that we do have to consider the fact that Simic decks, and even the Gruul decks with Riot, will have cards on it that do have counters on it. So maybe Titanic Brawl might even just pretty much sneak into those decks as well, since, like I said, an instant Prey Upon is nothing to sneeze at. Being able to do this at the end of your opponent's turn as a surprise to hopefully keep you with the tempo to take out like a blocker so you can swing in for lethal damage or such, or swing in for more damage to get to lethal damage. That is nothing to sneeze at. Plus, the art is just amazing. It's like a giant kaiju battle kind of scenario. And even the flavor text kind of foreshadows to this. Whoever wins, the neighborhood loses. And it's kind of fun how it's like a Gruul Cyclops fighting against a Simic monster, which kind of is hinting at, hey, you might want to use this in either Simic and Gruul style decks. So I think this card does have potential for standard play, though. For any other formats, probably not. There are better options and better ways to go about what you want to do. Next up, Quench. 1 in a blue for an instant spell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 mana. When properly invoked, the Plasma Globule encloses the offensive spell with a satisfying slurp. Now, this is definitely a Mana Leak Junior kind of scenario. Now, Mana Leak was a more powerful card for Standard and such during its time. Quench in itself, will it see play in our current Standard? I'm gonna say maybe, because Mana Leak style effects like this do sometimes see play, even though it's not Mana Leak. Let's be frank, yes, this is not Mana Leak. But it is a 2-cost counter an annoying spell and not have to target a specific spell. It's not like Essence Scatter where you have to target a creature spell, or Negate where you have to target a non-creature spell. This is simply a counter target spell unless the opponent pays this mana. That might actually, some control decks might be tempted by that just for early game. Now, obviously, the catch-22 is this spell does get worse later in the game once people have more mana in play and such. Still, though, it is something to consider. I think control decks will at least consider this card because it is a 2-cost counter a spell that does not have to be a specific target spell. So, well, specific spell, so to speak. You know what I mean. As for any other internal formats, probably not. I mean, Mana Leak. Enough said on that one. As for limited play, I mean, if you're playing the control deck, it's not bad to at least put 1 or 2 of these in your deck. Be careful, though, because it's kind of like the obvious scene as I mentioned with Standard. It's better early game, but later game it becomes a lot worse. So, keep that in mind. Overall, though, I do think it has a little chance to see Standard play. Next up, Biogenic Upgrade. 4 in a green for a sorcery spell. Distribute free +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures, then double the number of 1/1 counters on each of those creatures. To survive exceptional times, we must adapt by exceptional means. Okay, this card is kinda scary. Now, obviously, this is a really good limited card if you're in the decks that want this, that do have a lot of counters on their creatures and such. This could be good as a good upgrade to your cards, like a Biogenic Upgrade. Haha, pun there. But yeah, just being able to, like, say, make, let's say, for example, you have, like, 2 creatures that have, say, +1/+1 counters on them. Or maybe just 2 +1/+1 counters. Let's say they're kind of like that. Like, maybe they were adept creatures that have, like, 2 counters on them, so they're, like, 4/4s now. The ability to distribute these counters and then just put, like, 2 counters on one of them, making it 6/6, and then another one to making it a 5/5, and then doubling those counters to make them a lot bigger. That is a scary top end. So, for the right decks in Limited, this is a really good card. Now, in Commander, obviously this might actually have a chance to see play in the right decks that do have counter matter synergies, because doubling the counters on your creatures, if you have a deck that puts counters on a lot of things, that is something to be very scary about. What about Standard? I think it actually has a chance to get there. Yes, it is 6 mana, it is very costly, but if there was a card to help the Merfolk decks that do rely on counter matters, or even the Simic Ascendancy deck to work, this is probably the card that is the top end to help make that deck work. The factor that you can make a bigger board state with this is very nice, and if you can get a lot of counters that can help with Simic Ascendancy, who knows? This might actually see Standard play, even for that high mana cost. I think there is actually, this card will see Standard play, especially if Merfolk with the counter set synergy comes back into play. So, keep an eye out on this card. This card is a lot more scarier than you think at first glance. One card that is definitely scary at first glance Now, this one's in foreign language, but it is called Rhythm of Savagery, I think it is. It's a 1 green and a red enchantment, and it has creatures that you cast cannot be countered. Okay. Also, creatures you control have riot. So pretty much it makes cards that you have that you play during the game have riot no matter what. So if you cast like say a piker that doesn't have that's a vanilla piker, if you play that piker with this enchantment on the field, it will have riot, so it means it can become a free 2 or a 2/1 with haste. This card scares the living. This card scares me a lot. The fact that this is a free cost enchantment that makes it where your cards cannot be countered, specifically creatures that cannot be countered, that can be very, very powerful. Like, this is a great option against, like, control decks to help creature-oriented decks out a lot. And that's actually really cool. However, what scares me about this card is the factor that it gives... That's the part that doesn't scare me. What scares me, though, is the fact that it gives cards that usually don't have riot. So, there's just a lot of scary cards that giving it riot just is like... Ugh. Like, think about it. Giving Carnage Tyrant haste. That's safe enough. Giving Carnage Tyrant haste is absurd. Also, like, let's say giving Rekindling Phoenix haste. Yeah. I think this is, if there's a card to make red-green Stompy a thing, I think this card will see play in that deck, or at the very least it will see play in the sideboard once they know they're going against a control matchup, because this is a really good counter against a control matchup. It's a good card. It will see standard play, and so many synergies, so many creatures that should not have haste getting haste thanks to this card. Watch out, this card is probably going to be one you're going to find a little bit obnoxious throughout the meta. The only thing that's keeping this card is in check is a few cards we're going to see, and obviously Mortify, if I'm being honest, and the obvious enchantment hate cards that we have in the meta, like Thrashing Brontodon, Naturalize, etc., etc. Next up, we got another card with Seth McKinnon art, which, wow, Seth McKinnon's providing a lot of art in this set. Bankrupt in Blood, 1 in a black sorcery for, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice 2 creatures, but draw 3 cards. Your spirits can rest in peace, for your debts are paid. This card is interesting. On one hand, you might look at this and be like, oh, 2 mana draw 3 cards, that's kind of awesome, right? Well, the catch-22 is, to do this, you have to sacrifice 2 creatures. So in theory, you're sacrificing 2 cards and playing this card to essentially just replace those cards. Now, where this card actually might see a lot of interesting play is in like aristocrat-style decks that produce tokens. That might be where this card actually has a lot more beneficial play in, because sacrificing, there will be times where tokens are not being able to get through, or the tokens are staying still, and being able to sack those tokens just as a sack outlet and being able to draw 3 cards from it, that is actually really good. So I think in limited, in the right decks that want to trigger Afterlife, or just like aristocrat style decks in general, they will appreciate this card a lot for the fact that it's 2 mana, draw 3 cards, and hopefully like get an Afterlife trigger to trigger or something like that. Now, in standard, there is potential. The catch is, it is sorcery speed, so whether or not the opponent wants to kill their stuff on their own turn to draw the cards, we gotta wait and see. It depends on if Mardu Aristocrats or Orzhov Aristocrats is a thing, or even a Rakdos Aristocrat deck is a thing. We really just have to wait and see. Though, the card art itself is pretty good, and the effect itself is very powerful in the right deck, so keep that in mind. Next up, Blade Juggler. 4 in a black for a creature human rogue free 2 with Spectacle of 2 in a black, so you can pay 3 mana if you activate the Spectacle on this. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to you, and you draw a card. Honestly, just a really good limited card. It's a card that if you're in the Spectacle Rakdos type of deck, this is actually a pretty good filler in your deck on curve. For even 5 mana for a free 2 that just allows you to draw a card, that's fine. And the fact that you can use this for 3 mana to do that, that's perfectly fine. Cards that are able to cycle themselves and still keep a board presence are very tempting cards in limited metas, so keep that in mind. As for constructed, uh, some people might try this in Pauper. I highly doubt it, but some people might. And as for Standard, probably not. This is more just a really good limited card. Yeah, this is probably just what it is. It's a good limited card that you probably will just like to play just to be able to cycle and still keep a board presence. Next up, Smelt Ward Ignis. 1 in a red for a creature elemental. Uncommon. That is a 2-1 that has 2 in a red activated ability to sacrifice it and gain control of target creature with power 3 or less until in a turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until in a turn. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. Come in? Yes, it's warm. Yeah, that's kind of creepy. Him kind of welcoming you into a probably lava pit, if we're being quite frankly honest. Now, as for the card itself, it's actually kind of an interesting card. It is a piker, which for 2 mana we don't mind spending, and a 2-1 is actually not that bad. And the fact that you can actually just use it to sacrifice itself to do a, I always forget the name of this card, like active treason like effect to a opponent's creature, that is actually pretty powerful in the right decks, because there are times where you play this for its 2-1, you get in for a few points of damage, then the opponent plays a blocker. You can't really do anything with this, it's kind of a dead card. So then it's like, okay, then I'm just going to sacrifice this, cast Active Treason, steal your stuff, maybe finish it for the game, or just get in some quick points of damage. That's powerful. I mean, the main power of this card is the fact that not many people like to play Active Treason because it is kind of a spell that, in various board states, could become a dead card in their deck in some limited formats. However, the fact that this is just a piker in itself with this ability, that makes this a lot more effective and just a lot better card in general. In limited. In constructed, nah. There's a lot of removal in the current standard meta, and the factor is you're kind of foreshadowing what you're doing when you play this card, so yeah. I think it's a great limited card, but for constructed, I highly doubt it. Who knows? It is kind of one of those weak enough stats that people might not want to waste removal on it, but the factor is that it does have the Active Treason-like effect as a sacrifice ability. If the proper aristocrat decks happen, they might be a lot more cautious of this card, so keep that in mind. Next up, one of my favorite cards of this set that I've seen so far, revealed by Notches, Electro Dominance. It's red and red for an instant spell. Electro Dominance deals X damage to any target, so target player, target creature, target planeswalker, your choice. You may cast a card with converted mana cost X or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Basically, we turned a bunch of little lightnings into one big lightning. And that's what this card does. Oh my, this card is absurd. Okay, the reason why this card is absurd, people probably don't realize this at first glance. This is kind of a secret quicken that they've given us into the meta, because what this card does is it doesn't follow the usual rules of when you have to cast spells. So let's say it gives the opportunity to make cards that don't usually have flash or instant speed. It gives us the opportunity to give those cards instant speed and such, along with a burn spell. So, for example, you can now cast sorcery spells at the end of the opponent's turn. Like, for example, the one combo I could think of is like in my 1000-Year Goblins deck. You can literally deal 6 damage to the opponent by spending 6 mana, deal 4 damage, and then cast Pirate's Pillage at the end of their turn, discard, get the treasures, do it at the end of their turn so you don't have to worry about it being countered on your turn and such. Just little stuff like that. Also, the power of this card is, like I said, it gives other cards the potential to be played at the end of the opponent's turn, like maybe some planeswalkers you want to cast, or maybe some really powerful sorcery spells that you don't mind. It's just the tempo advantage you can get from this, and it also is a crazy card that synergizes ridiculously well with 1000-Year Storm. I mean, the fact that Electro Dominance, let's say you have 1000-Year Storm on the battlefield, then you Electro Dominance, do that, and then the next spell you cast, let's presume it's a sorcery, because probably beneficial it's a sorcery, that will duplicate Dates the 1000-Year Storm because you're casting it rather than just playing it. It's just like, this card is amazing. This card, I am going to play this a lot probably in the upcoming standard. This card is probably one of my favorite cards they revealed so far. It's just, it's amazing. Next up, another card to make the Simic players as hyped as I was with Electro Dominance, Frilled Mystic, green green and a blue blue for an elf lizard wizard. Yes, that's what it is. An elf lizard wizard for a free 2 with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you may counter target spell. Your arrival was expected and unwelcome. So, as many people have known, this is Mystic Snake. We got a Mystic Snake back in Standard. And there are many Simic players that are so happy about this, because this is just a really good card. Many people, back in the past, like, I wasn't able to play in that time because I got started into Magic when, during into the Journey into Nits kind of scenario, pretty much I'm forgetting the name, pretty much during the time of just essentially Journey into Nits and then going into the cons of Tarkir and such. So I wasn't able to have time to play with Mystic Snake, but I have seen a lot played in Cube, and Mystic Snake is a powerful card. The ability to get the board presence and also to get a counterspell out of it is really good. Just, I have a feeling that if we want to make a Bant or even a Timur control deck be a thing, this card just makes that deck help right off the bat. Who knows, maybe even a Simic control deck thanks to this. But yeah, Thrilled Mystic, great card. We'll see Standard play. Also, it's just an Elf Lizard Wizard. That's just fun to roll off the tongue. Who knows, maybe you play this in like a Simic Elf deck. Who knows. Elf Lizard Wizard. That's just a fun thing to roll off your tongue. Next up, a very powerful card they provided, Rampage the Clans. Free and a green for an instant spell. Destroy all artifacts and enchantments. For each permanent destroyed this way, its controller, keep that in mind, creates a free green center creature token. Rage. Rage until the whole world burns. And note that this is a story spotlight card, so it's definitely safe to say that Damarad is wrecking the town from what it sounds like, or the whole Gruul clan is doing that. So, what makes this card very powerful? Well, for one, this is a really powerful, I would say commander, for obvious reasons. The factor that you can destroy a lot of stuff, and hopefully they're very problematic artifacts or enchantments, and you don't mind them getting a free green center token out of it. That could be very powerful. Now, you do want to make sure you do this on a proper turn, where you don't want to do this, like, at the end of your turn, cast this, because, well, then the opponents have a bunch of creatures that they're going to attack you with. You probably want to do this at the end of an opponent's turn or something like that, so that you can find a way to answer the Centaurs when it comes out. As for Standard, it might actually see it. The factor is that it could destroy some very problematic artifacts and enchantments in Standard. Really good card for that, but even then, you could actually use this for some silly synergies. Like, as many people know, there are a lot of ways, including a card we're going to talk about, there's a lot of ways in Standard to generate treasure tokens. We have a lot. There's a lot of ways to get a lot of artifacts for cheap out on the battlefield thanks to the treasure token synergies. And one of the coolest decks that people have been trying to brew around is actually getting a bunch of treasures out, and then at the end of the opponent's turn, casting Rampage to the clans and try to swing in for lethal. And there are ways to do that. I mean, Treasure Map is one thing I could think of right off the bat. There's even stuff like Trove of Temptation, or even like cards like Direfleet Hoarder or such, or the list can go on. There is a lot of ways to generate treasure that came from the Ixalan block, and even one that's even coming from Ravnica allegiances, believe it or not. We'll get to it once we get to it, but people have been thinking decks like that, and then there's even just other ways to generate token artifacts, like with the new Dovin Bond, or even the Tezzeret that we got from the core set and such, so keep that in mind. Overall, I do think this card might have a very good chance to see Standard play just for that gimmick deck alone. But also, it's just a really good tech card if you are... Because, worst case scenario, you could actually play this in a Gruul mid-range deck. You have to deal with the annoying sailways and maybe even Ixalan's bindings that hit your creatures. Oh hey, Rampage the clans, you get all your stuff back. Sure, they'll get free freeze, but if your creatures are big enough and are a serious enough threat, they probably are going to overcome the free freeze without a sweat. So overall, really great card. Next up, the card that gets my honorary mention of I might just toy with this in a 1,000-year goblin deck just for the giggles. Zurta a Goblin. Red and green for a Goblin Berserker with Riot. So it's either a 2/2 with haste or free. Among the Zurta clan, goblins are the first to enter battle fury. When the battle is over, the survivors are still throttling at the mouth, looking for someone to hit. Now, for Constructed, I think this actually has a chance to see play. The factor that it can be a 2-2 with haste, or just a free for 2 mana, that's actually very powerful. It's a very good aggressive style creature. In the right aggro based decks, they might actually like this card a lot. But in limited, this is also a fine card as well. Let's say you're going Gruul aggro. Yeah, you'll play this card without a sweat. It's a 2-2 with haste, so you can get in a quick point of damage, or just a free, which is a aggressive creature you can use to hit stuff in the face. Hit stuff in the face, hit stuff in the face, be Gruul. Go aggressive, go Gruul. Yeah, this card will probably see play in those limited without a sweat. As for Constructed, as I mentioned before, possibly, especially if we get a Gruul early game aggro deck, or maybe even a Jun aggro deck, that's a possibility. We're getting the Chalk Lands. It makes this a lot easier to cast, even for the green and the red, so keep that in mind. Yeah, I can see this card seeing play. It's just the stats themselves are decent enough for it to see play. Next up, this one I don't know the name of, but I do know what the card does. It's free and a green for an enchantment. It's like something project, if I recall correctly. And it has the ability that whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if that creature is not in your graveyard, and you don't have a and you don't control a creature that has the same name as a creature that enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Honestly, this just seems like a perfect card for Commander. The fact that it's a singleton format, and the fact that you're going to have a unique variety of creatures, just the fact that you can play this enchantment down, and then anytime you play a creature, you draw a card. That's actually really good in Commander. Commander likes their card draw engines. This is a card draw engine. Also, a really good card draw engine for Arena whenever they have their singleton formats. And I think that's kind of why this card was designed for, just for that aspect alone. Still, it is good Commander card. As for Constructed, I don't know if a Commander style standard deck can be a thing. I mean, this is an incentive for it because a card draw engine is nice, but on the other side of the coin, we have better card draw engines that are in the set, and we also have better card draw engines in the meta in general, so probably not. This is more like a Commander slash play at the one time in the MTG Arena when they have their singleton events, so keep that in mind. One card that we'll see play in Commander, and actually might see play in Standard, Smothering Tithe. Free and a white for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2 mana. If the player doesn't, you create a colorless treasure artifact token with sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color. So hey, Ravnica actually gives us a way to make treasures. Who would have thought of it? Now, let's get the obvious out of the way first. Is this card going to see him play in Commander? Yep. The fact that it gives white now an opportunity for ramp, that is very powerful in decks that really need the mana ramp. Like, if you're playing green-white, you probably don't need it, but any, like, mono-white decks or blue-white decks or any decks that don't have the ramp colors within them, playing this card is very beneficial since it allows them, hey, if you're playing a multiplayer game, players are going to draw cards. And they probably are not wanting to pay the 2 mana, so you are going to generate the treasure, which then will help you ramp. So yeah, this card will see Commander play, no sweat about it. It's just a really good Commander card. As for Standard, it actually might have a chance, believe it or not. And the only reason why I'm saying that is, yeah, the problem is it is free white for a debatably do-nothing enchantment, but the way you have to look at this, it's free and a white for at the start of the opponent's next turn and their following turns after, if they don't pay 2 mana, you're going to generate a treasure. And just that little incremental mana ramp can be very beneficial. Now, the one combo that people are mentioning right off the bat is this having Smothering Tithe out with emergency powers, so the opponent has to draw 7 cards. Hopefully you get 7 treasures, and then you play it on your turn to get the addendum effect, so you can play a level in riches and win the game that way. That is a way to win the game, so that is something to consider. But overall, I think this card will obviously see Commander play, and it actually has a really decent chance to see some Standard play. Believe it or not. Who knows? We will await the donations that our Standard opponents will give us. Next up, Gutter Bones. 1 black for a 2/1, it's Skeleton Warrior, a rare. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it has 1 in a black to return Gutter Bones from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only during your turn, and only if an opponent lost life this turn. Down here, fiends don't stay dead. Now, is this card good? Yes and no. Now, let's get to the part why I'm going to say no to this. The factor is this card wants to be a Blood-Soaked champion from the Khans of Tarkir, because it is a very similar effect to an extent. But the problem is what made Blood-Soaked champion very beneficial is the fact that it goes back on the battlefield. This goes back to your hand. And we even have stuff in the meta that allows to get stuff back on the battlefield tapped, like reassembling skeleton and such. So, for that alone, the card is not that great. However, this is a card that's a recurable piker, and if you are playing an aggro deck, you might not mind that. You might not mind the factor that this is still a recursive 2-1 that you can do to get a piker out to try to get aggressive damage into the face, even with the enter the battlefield tapped effect and all that stuff. So in the aggro decks, or even, I still think it has potential in those decks because it is a way to get a consistent piker out on the battlefield to get the 2-1 damage in. And also, it is a recursion engine for aristocratic decks. Granted, like I said again before, reassembling skeleton. But who knows? This also could actually see play in, I'm forgetting the name of the artifact specifically from Core 19. I think it's Desecrated Tomb, if I remember correctly. That's the one that when a card returns in the graveyard, or exits the graveyard from any way, you create a bad token. So maybe Gutter Bones, along with Reassembling Skeleton, can actually make that deck work, just finding ways to get cards back from the graveyard onto ASIC from the graveyard, so you can create the bat tokens, and then you get the 2-1, and then you can sack it, and then return it, and then create more bat tokens and such. So in Standard, there's a potential for this to see play just for those factors alone. For Limited, it's a fine card. I mean, it is a consistent creature you can get onto the battlefield. It's a fine Limited card. I don't say it's the best Limited card, like, you probably will feel bad pulling this as a rare, but once you get into kind of like the aggro deck, once you get into that archetype, you'll play this card without a sweat. Next up, Basilica Bellhaunt. 2 white and 2 black for a free 4 spirit. When Basilica Bellhaunt enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, and you gain free life. You can heal their tolling only when your debt is due. Now, this card in general, out of the 2-2 of one color, 2 of the other color, the guild color cycle that we've been getting, it's probably one of the least exciting ones of the set, because, sure, a free 4 stat is fine, and the fact that you gain free life of it is fine, and you make the opponent discard a card is fine. It is just that, though. It's fine. It's not, like, amazing. It's not Frilled Mystic. It's not even Rakdos Chain World. It's just, I see this card as a fine card in Limited if you're in the Orzhov colors, because being able to hand hate someone out, in a sense, and gaining the free life can be very beneficial. Like, we've seen cards played like the Rat in Guilds of Ravnica, because being able to get cards out of your opponent's hand was a lot more powerful than you would take at first glance. So, just for that factor alone, I mean, heck, the source of it is Draftaholics Anonymous, so I think it's safe to say that this is purposely just an intended draft card. Can it make it into Standard? I don't think so, but who knows? I've been wrong before. Maybe you put this in, attach a Helm of Hosts on this and make the opponent have a consistent discard outlet, or find ways like Frost Duplicates, but that is very color intensive. But on the other side of the coin, we are going to get the Shock Lands and Check Lands, so who knows? I think it's a slight, I highly doubt it, but I could be wrong. Now, a card that might see play, Pitiless Pontiff. Black and white for a creature, Vampire Cleric, a bear, a 2-2, which has an activate ability of 1 mana. Sacrifice another creature. Pitiless Pontiff gains Death Tough and Indestructible until end of turn. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that this is a very good bomb in Limited. Like, it's a really great bomb in Limited. The fact that you can sack, like, tokens or such, like, at the end of the opponent's turn, or even just sack cards that have the Afterlife triggers so you can get the Spirit tokens, and then giving this Indestructible and Death Touch to make it where you can block with it and the opponent's creature gets killed because Death Touch, and still Pitiless Pontiff survives because it gets Indestructible. That is a very powerful effect. It might even have a chance to see standard play because the factor of it is that it is a way to make the aristocrat deck work. The catch, and it is a catch, it is the fact that you do have to spend 1 mana to sacrifice a creature. Mostly aristocratic decks that do populate well in the meta benefit well out of sacrifice cards that are costless, that the cost is sacrificing this creature rather than the mana cost. So, yeah. By that factor alone, that's why I'm kind of a little fishy about this seeing standard play, but the power level is there. If an aristocratic deck is going to be seen play at standard, we obviously need the free sack outlet engine, obviously. But if Pitiless Pontiff is the closest thing we're going to get to it, that might just be enough. Maybe. Next up, a card that is, boy, a card I'm grateful to see. Cry of the Carnarium. 1 black and a black for a sorcery spell. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Exile all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. If your ears bleed, it's a party. If your eyes bleed, it's a Rakdos party. Now, this card is really good in standard. This will see standard play. Why will it see standard play? For a lot of good reasons. One, it's the factor that it exiles creature cards that go to the graveyard. This hits Archlight Phoenix's decks without a sweat. Being able to exile the Archlight Phoenixes with this spell as a board wipe, that's really good. Also, it hits Golgari pretty well because there are creatures that they don't mind reanimating, like, for example, Chupacabra, or even like the Elf Growth Shaman. Oh, I always forget. It's the green-black one that makes you mill free cards and such. And the factor that it also hits Afterlife pretty significantly well, since when creatures are exiled, they don't die. So it does actually hit Afterlife cards very well as well. It's a really good tech card. This card will see standard play, at least either in the sideboard or even just maybe in the main board if Archlight Phoenix's decks are still popular enough, or even decks that do benefit with the Afterlife triggers and such. I'm grateful Wizards put this card into the set just to protect us from those archetypes. Just Graveyard Hate in general on a board wipe is a very good card. Now, in other formats, maybe? I mean, it might have a chance just to see a Legacy play just for the factor that it can hit out the Archlight Phoenix's deck and even in Modern, so keep that in mind. Now, for like Commander, better options, but it's not a bad option. Next up, a split card of the set, Consecrate and Consume. Consecrate, 1 and a hybrid mana of white or black for an instant, exile target card from a graveyard, draw a card, or Consume, which is 2, white and a black for a sorcery spell, target player sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. You gain life equal to its power. Now, Consecrate, on one hand, is not that exciting of a card. I mean, we have seen this cards in Ravnica sets before. The special, hey, you get to target a specific card in the graveyard and cycle itself. We've seen this card before, and it has its place. Like, I think it has a chance to see standard play, not for the Consecrate side, but for the Consume side. Consume in itself, it's a very powerful effect, especially against decks that run like really high power creatures, like, I don't know, Carnage Tyrant, and the fact that you're forcing the player to sacrifice it rather than it being targeted helps kill cards like that, or even any really problematic hexproof creatures that have high power. And so keep that in mind. I think the Consume aspect of this is what make this card will see standard play. I think Consecrate will see play once in a while because who knows, maybe you want to exile a very problematic card from a graveyard, maybe when the opponent's trying to reanimate it and such, so that's a possibility. I think with that little versatility alone, that will probably make the card see standard play. As for any other formats, maybe. I mean, there are better options in other formats. But who knows, maybe if you're making an Orzhov All the Things deck, it's not a bad card to put in your deck. Next up, High Alert. 1 white and a black for an enchantment, or not black, white and a blue, you goofball. 1 white and a blue for an enchantment that has each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have Defender, and 2 white and a blue to untap target creature. Well, if Arcadius needed any more fuel to actually make the deck a possibility, this is it. I mean, the factor that now you don't need to have Arcades out on the battlefield as long as you have this enchantment to make your defender creatures attack, that's very powerful. And the fact that they attack with their toughness can make actually big butt decks work. Like, it might even make that humongous accuracy play because the factor is, oh hey, it is a 2/5, but it's going to attack with 5 and it's hexproof and it's hard to target, so yeah. And there's other cards that have high toughness but are really hard to remove that still can attack it with their toughness, so who knows. Thanks to this card, the big butts deck might actually be a thing again. People wanted to make Arcades work, and if this card doesn't do it, I would be surprised what doesn't. So, yeah, it will obviously see Commander decks and the Arcades style Commander decks, which are Athena Commander. So keep that in mind. Any other formats? Probably not, but I wouldn't be surprised if it sees play in other formats. Next up, another split card, the Rakdos variation, Carnival and Carnage. Carnival, 1 Rakdos, either black or red hybrid, for an instant spell to deal 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and 1 damage to that permanent's controller. Or Carnage, which is a sorcery speed spell for 2 black and a red, for Carnage dealing 3 damage to a target opponent, that player discards 2 cards. So, that's Blightning. Huh. Overall, this card is just fine. I think this card is a lot more standard playable than you would think at first glance, thanks to one card we're going to be seeing up pretty soon. We'll get to talking about that, because the fact that this can actually unintentionally become a kill spell thanks to Carnival is something to be considerate about. But I think mostly the most excitement of this card is the Carnage site, which is Blightning. This is pretty much a Blightning that costs a little bit more, but Blightning was a very powerful card in Standard in the past, so by that factor alone, it might actually make this card see play. Maybe. I think it's a fine card. It's definitely a fine limited card. As for Constructed, it's kind of a wait-and-see scenario. I mean, Blightning was a good card in Standard in the past, so if it's a good card in the current meta, we'll wait and see. But Carnival, it might actually just have a chance to see play thanks to Carnival alone, thanks to a very specific card, which we're going to get to pretty soon. But for first, we're going to talk about another very powerful card that's coming from this set, which is Prime Speaker Vanifar. 2 green and a blue for a legendary creature, Elf Ooze Wizard. Wow, Wizard is going crazy with the creature types here in Simic. It's a legendary creature, that's a 2/4, that has an activated ability to sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So, we got a Birthing Pod. Now, not exactly as great as Birthing Pod, but we got a Birthing Pod. We got a Birthing Pod in Standard. That is kind of scary. Now, most people are speculating this card for Commander for obvious reasons. This is a really good Commander card. I mean, the fact that this could be your Commander, and you can have Birthing Pod as a Commander. I mean, the Command Zone, as this got revealed by, they were talking all a bunch of the card combos you can do with Prime Speaker Vanifar with, like, Intruder Alert, and also stuff like, oh, I'm forgetting the name of all the cards, but pretty much any good untapping target permanent stuff that is in the meta and such. So by that factor alone, this is a great Commander card. I mean, people will be playing this in Commander, and you're going to see some silly shenanigans, so go get the popcorn for that. Does this have a chance to see play in other constructed formats? Possibly. I mean, the factor is that this is a scary card that can get you a creature out. It's a Birthing Pod. And Birthing Pod has been a very powerful card in previous formats. Now, it's a creature, and it's prone to hate in the meta, such as Lava Coil and such. But still, it's not like we have any cards to give it haste. Oh, wait, we do with that green and red enchantment. Ugh. Yeah, I think this card will see standard play. It's either going to see play in a Simic deck or a Timur deck. Yeah, just that ability. Birthing Pod is an ability not to underestimate. Because the ability to make like a 2-drop into a powerful 3-drop that you can get onto the battlefield without it being countered, that is a very powerful effect. Don't underestimate that. Oh, and also, just out of the blue, you can actually, like, if you play this and it stays alive and you play a 5-drop, oh, you can sacrifice that 5-drop and get your Carnage Tyrant. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Yeah, this card will see standard play. Or at least it has very good chance to see standard play. It might not, because the factor is this is a very powerful card, and usually very powerful cards do get hated out pretty quick. So keep that in mind. Next up, Pestilent Spirit. 2 and a black for a free 2 with Menace and Death Touch, so really good stats and really good abilities. Oh, and it also has one extra little fiend, just a little fiend. Instant and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. Which, if people who don't know, Death Touch essentially means any amount of damage that gets dealt to a creature is enough to destroy it. Its stench corrodes steel. Its miasma sickens angels. Its finality ends hope. So, is this card good? Yeah, it's really good. I mean, the fact that it makes stuff like Carnival into a much more playable card, since Carnival can now be a 1 mana, oh, kill a target creature. Yeah, that's really silly. It also makes Shock into a kill spell, which is silly. It also even makes Lava Coil actually be able to kill higher power creatures and exile them, or higher toughness creatures and exile them. Wow, that's ridiculously absurd. This also can also see play in Orzhov because there are damage-based spells like I always forget it. It's the one that it's essentially deal 1 damage or 2 damage to a target attacking creature. You've seen it once in a while. Seen a lot play in like draft and such. Now making those spells into kill spells as well, that is really silly. This card will see standard play, no sweat about it. That ability, even without that ability alone, the factor that it's a free mana free 2 with Menace and Death Touch, that's really powerful stats for a creature. I mean, the factor that even the opponent has to block 2 creatures, you can still kill those 2 creatures. So it works as a way to get 2 creatures out for a 2-for-1, which is really good. So yeah, I mean, the obvious combo I can think of right off the bat with this card is with like Cosmotronic Wave. Deal 1 damage to all creatures and enemy controls, which means, oh hey, it's a one-sided board wipe. Yeah, this card will see standard play. I think it might even actually play in Commander and might even see play in other formats. This card is that powerful, it's really absurd. Next up, Enraze 4-1 5 green, 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 so 8 mana for 7-7 Vigorous Trample Haste. That's powerful. And also, when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. Smash this city into pieces from Dummy Raid. So, is this card a good card for Standard? I say yes. I mean, the fact that there are ways we can get this card out for cheap, gee, I don't know, maybe with a Prime Speaker Vanifar. But even for a top end for, say, a Selesnya deck, especially since we have ways to ramp like with Sonic Freyleys and such, being able to do that and then just be able to use this as like a 1 or 2 of in their deck as a finisher to get your tokens in for lethal damage, that's a very powerful effect. Now, don't get me wrong, 8 mana is a lot of mana, but we are in a meta where ramping is actually a lot more easier than people take at first glance. And with that factor alone, I do think this card has the potential to see standard play. A lot of people like the green go white stompy decks a lot, so yeah, this card will just see play because of that fact alone. As for other formats, this will probably see Commander play, no sweat about that, since it does kind of work like a really good finisher in some token-based strategy decks. As for formats like, say, Modern or Legacy, probably not too high cost, but who knows, we'll wait and see. And that is all the cards that got revealed during Friday, and the one we got revealed on Saturday. Whew, I still can't wait to see more from the set. As for what's going to be my 100 episode video, I'm still working on a script on that. Technically, this would have been the 100th episode, but I kind of wanted to work on a special 100 for over 100 episode video that I am still tweaking the script of and going to work on that over the next week. So I'm still going to continue on this still to make sure that I can cover the cards that get spoiled for Ravnica Allegiances, because so far the set does look pretty cool. I can't wait to see what they provide for us. Anyway, this is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as LevDev, signing out.